My name is Francis, and yesterday I turned 75 years old. I thought it would be just another quiet birthday in my little house where Harold and I spent 47 years together before he passed. I was making my morning coffee when David pulled up in that black sedan. My heart jumped with joy, seeing my son on my special day, but something felt different about his expression. The way he stood at my door, hands shoved deep in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. When he said we were going somewhere special for my birthday, I should have trusted that cold feeling creeping up my spine. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you are watching from, and please hit that like button. Trust me, you will want to hear how this birthday changed everything about my life forever. David has always been my pride and joy. Ever since Harold died 3 years ago, my son made sure to call me every Sunday evening, sometimes stopping by with groceries or just to check on me. He would tell me about Emma's soccer games, about his work at the insurance company, about how Patricia was doing with her new job at the dental office. Those conversations kept me going through the loneliness that settled in after losing my husband of 47 years. Harold used to make such a fuss over my birthdays. He would wake me up with pancakes shaped like flowers, terrible off key, singing, and always, a single red rose from our garden. The house would smell like vanilla candles and fresh coffee, and we would spend the whole day just enjoying each other's company. Sometimes David and his family would join us for dinner, and Patricia would bring one of her famous chocolate cakes. This year, David had promised something special. "Mom, I want to make this birthday memorable," he had said during our last phone call. "You deserve to celebrate properly." I had spent the morning getting ready, choosing my best navy blue dress that Harold always said brought out my eyes, the one with tiny pearl buttons that Emma had admired last Christmas. When David arrived, though everything felt wrong, he didn't have flowers, no wrapped gift, no warm hug that lingered just a little too long. Instead, he stood stiffly in my doorway, wearing a dark suit I had never seen before, checking his watch like he was late for an appointment. "Where are Patricia and Emma?" I asked, grabbing my purse and light jacket. "Are they meeting us at the restaurant?" "They're preparing a surprise," he said, but his voice sounded hollow, rehearsed. "We need to go now, Mom. We have a schedule to keep." Something about the way he said schedule made my stomach tighten. In all my years of birthdays, David had never talked about schedules. He guided me towards the black car with his hand on my elbow, more firmly than necessary, like he was afraid I might change my mind and go back inside. The car was pristine, too clean, like those rental cars you see at the airport. David got behind the wheel and immediately started the engine without adjusting the mirrors or the seat the way he usually did. As we pulled away from my house, I watched my little garden disappear in the side mirror. The roses Harold had planted starting to bloom for spring. "David, honey, where exactly are we going?" I asked, settling into the passenger seat. "You know I like that little Italian place downtown, Giuseppe's. Remember how your father used to take us there?" He didn't answer right away. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel, and I noticed a muscle twitching in his jaw. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, colder. "We're not going to Giuseppe's, Mom." Instead of heading downtown toward the familiar streets lined with shops and restaurants, David turned onto the highway that led out of the city. The buildings grew smaller in the distance, replaced by empty fields and clusters of trees that I didn't recognize. My birthday excitement was slowly transforming into confusion, then concern. "David, you're going the wrong way," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "The restaurants are back that direction." He adjusted his rearview mirror and merged into the fast lane, ignoring my comment completely. The speedometer climbed higher than it needed to for a pleasant birthday drive. I watched the exit signs flash by: Millfield, Riverside, Clearwater. Names I knew but had no reason to visit. "Son, talk to me. What's this surprise you and Patricia have planned?" That's when he said the words that made my blood freeze in my veins. "Mom, this will be your last celebration. You need to accept that." The car felt like it had suddenly filled with ice water. I stared at David's profile, searching for any sign that he was joking, that this was some kind of misguided attempt at humor. But his expression remained stone cold, focused on the road ahead, like he was driving to a business meeting. "What do you mean, my last celebration?" My voice came out smaller than I intended. David sighed heavily, like I was being deliberately difficult. "Your 75 years old mom, living alone in that house, isn't safe anymore. Patricia and I have been discussing this for months." "Discussing what exactly?" "Your situation. The way you forgot to turn off the stove last month. How you got confused about what day Emma's recital was. You're becoming a liability to yourself and to us." Each word hit me like a physical blow. I didn't forget about the stove, David. The burner wasn't working properly. And I wrote down the wrong date for Emma's recital because Patricia told me Tuesday when it was actually Thursday. "You're making excuses," he said, his voice growing more irritated. "Patricia says you repeat yourself during phone conversations. You ask the same questions multiple times." Patricia says the hurt in my chest was spreading, making it hard to breathe. "Since when do you base decisions about me on what Patricia says?" David's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Since she's the one who has to deal with the consequences when something happens to you. Do you know how much it costs to hire someone to check on you every day? Do you know what kind of liability we face if you fall down those stairs or leave the gas on?" The landscape outside was becoming more rural, more isolated. Small farmhouses dotted the horizon, separated by miles of empty pasture. I realized I had no idea where we were going, and for the first time in my life, I was afraid of my own son. "I've been taking care of myself just fine," I said, trying to inject some strength back into my voice. "I grocery shop, I pay my bills, I maintain the house. I'm not some helpless old woman who needs to be managed." "The house," David laughed bitterly. "Mom, do you know what that property is worth? Do you know how much money you're sitting on while Patricia and I struggle to pay Emma's college savings and our mortgage?" There it was, the truth underneath all his concern about my safety and well-being. Money. The house Harold and I had spent decades paying off, the home where we had raised David, where every room held memories of our life together. Patricia wanted it. We drove past a weathered sign that read "Mountain View, 20 miles." My stomach dropped as I realized we were heading into the remote hill country, where the nearest neighbor might be miles away. David pulled into a gas station that looked like it had been forgotten by time, with two old-fashioned pumps and a small building that might have been white once upon a time. "I need to make a phone call," he said, parking near the building. "Stay in the car." As I watched him walk away, pulling his cell phone from his pocket, I noticed a man sitting on a bench outside the gas station. He was maybe 50 years old, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to be watching our car with interest. Something about the way David approached him, the way they shook hands like old acquaintances, made my heart race with panic. This wasn't a random stop. This was planned. The man David had met walked over to our car while my son finished his phone conversation. He tapped gently on the window, and I could see him mouthing the word Francis through the glass. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window. "Mrs. Francis." His voice was surprisingly gentle, with a slight southern accent that reminded me of my father. "My name is Marcus. Your son asked me to help you get to where you're going today." "I don't understand," I said, looking back toward David, who was still on his phone with his back turned to us. "Where am I going, and who are you?" Marcus opened the passenger door and gestured for me to step out. "Ma'am, I think it would be easier if I explained while we drive. Would you mind riding with me for the rest of your trip?" The pieces started falling into place with horrible clarity. David walked back toward us, ending his phone call and slipping the phone into his jacket pocket. He avoided making eye contact with me as Marcus held the car door open. "David," I said, my voice shaking now. "What is happening here? Who is this man?" My son finally looked at me, and what I saw in his eyes broke something fundamental inside my chest. There was no warmth, no love, no recognition of the woman who had raised him, who had spent countless nights nursing him through fevers and helping him with homework and celebrating every achievement in his life. "This man will take you to your new home," David said in the same tone he might use to discuss the weather. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be." My new home. I felt like I was in a nightmare that I couldn't wake up from. "David, I have a home, the home where you grew up, the home where your father and I had," he interrupted. "Past tense, Mom, that life is over." Marcus seemed uncomfortable with the coldness in David's voice. He gently took my elbow and helped me out of David's car. "Mrs. Francis, I promise you're going to be safe. I'm going to take good care of you." David handed Marcus a manila envelope and a small suitcase that I recognized as my old travel bag. When had he packed it? When had he gone through my belongings and decided what I would need for this new home he was sending me to? "This has everything you should need," David said to Marcus. Not to me. Like I wasn't even standing there. "The paperwork is all in order. She's been evaluated, and the family has made the decision." "What paperwork?" I demanded, reaching for the envelope. "What evaluation, David? What have you done?" But he was already walking back to his black sedan. He got in, started the engine, and drove away without another word. No goodbye, no explanation, no acknowledgement that he was abandoning his mother on her 75th birthday in the middle of nowhere with a complete stranger. Marcus watched the car disappear down the highway, then looked at me with something that might have been sympathy. "Mrs. Francis, I know this is confusing and scary. Why don't we get in my truck and I'll explain what I can while we drive?" His truck was an older model, Ford, clean but clearly well used, with a toolbox in the back and a small cross hanging from the rearview mirror. As we pulled back onto the highway heading deeper into the mountains, Marcus began to speak in that same gentle voice. "Ma'am, I want you to know that I'm not who your son thinks I am." That got my attention. "What do you mean?" "I'm a private investigator," Marcus said, keeping his eyes on the winding mountain road. "Your daughter-in-law hired me 3 months ago to document evidence that you're not capable of living independently." The world seemed to tilt sideways. Evidence of what? Mental decline, unsafe living conditions, incidents that would justify having you declared incompetent. Marcus paused, choosing his words carefully. "Mrs. Francis, I've been watching you for weeks, following you to the grocery store, the pharmacy, your doctor's appointments. I've been taking pictures and writing reports." I felt sick to my stomach. "And what did you find?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "I found a 75-year-old woman who drives carefully, keeps a clean house, pays her bills on time, and volunteers at the church food bank every Wednesday. I found someone who is sharper and more independent than most people half her age." The relief I felt was immediately overshadowed by a new wave of fear. "Then why are you here? Why are you driving me somewhere instead of telling Patricia you couldn't find anything wrong?" "Because," Marcus said, his voice growing grim, "Patricia doesn't want evidence that you're incompetent. She wants evidence that appears to show you're incompetent. She's been paying me to create a false narrative." As the mountain road curved higher into the hills, Marcus continued his explanation. The envelope David had given him contained forged medical evaluations, falsified incident reports, and legal documents that would allow Patricia to have me committed to a psychiatric facility against my will. Once I was declared mentally unfit, David and Patricia would have complete control over my finances and property. "The plan was for me to drive you to Pinehurst Behavioral Health Center," Marcus said. "It's a private facility about 2 hours from here, way up in the mountains, where your friends and neighbors would never think to look for you. Patricia already has a room reserved." "But you're not taking me there." "No, ma'am, I am not." Marcus pulled into the parking lot of a small mountain diner that looked like it had been serving travelers since the 1950s. The building was painted bright yellow with blue trim, and a hand-painted sign read, "Mountain View Cafe, best coffee and pie for miles. Despite everything that had happened, the sight of such a cheerful, normal place made me feel slightly more hopeful. I need to tell you the rest of the story, Marcus said as we sat across from each other in a red vinyl booth. A waitress who looked about my age brought us coffee, without being asked, the kind of automatic hospitality you only find in small towns. Mrs. Francis, I've been investigating people for 22 years. I've seen all kinds of family disputes, insurance fraud, cheating spouses, you name it. But what your daughter-in-law asked me to do crossed a line I've never crossed before. He opened the manila envelope and spread its contents across the table. I saw my name on document after document, but none of the handwriting was mine. None of the dates or incidents matched my actual life. Patricia created a timeline of alleged mental health episodes, Marcus explained, pointing to a typed report. According to this, you called 911 6 times last month, claiming there were intruders in your house. You were found wandering downtown in your nightgown. You forgot to pay your electric bill and your power was shut off. None of that happened, I said, staring at the papers in disbelief. I know. I was watching you last month, remember? You never called 911. You never wandered anywhere in your nightgown. Your power never got shut off. Marcus leaned forward, his expression serious. Patricia has been planning this for almost a year. She found a corrupt doctor who will sign off on a mental health evaluation he's never actually performed. She's identified a facility that accepts patients with minimal oversight. She even has a buyer lined up for your house. The coffee in my cup had grown cold, but I wrapped my hands around it anyway, needing something solid to hold on to. How much do you know about the financial side? More than I wish I did. Marcus sighed. Patricia and David are deeper in debt than you probably realize. They refinanced their house twice, they're behind on Emma's private school tuition. And Patricia has been spending money on online shopping, like it's going out of style. Your house and savings account represent enough money to solve all their problems. And David is going along with this. Patricia convinced him that you're becoming a burden and a liability. She's been feeding him stories about phone calls where you seemed confused, incidents that supposedly happened during her visits to your house. She's very good at manipulation, Mrs. Francis. Your son thinks he's making a difficult but necessary decision for your own good. I thought about Emma, my granddaughter, who had always been so sweet and attentive. Does Emma know? That's the interesting part, Marcus said. I don't think she does. In fact, I think Emma might be our secret weapon. Marcus explained that he had been having second thoughts about this job for weeks. The more he observed me, the more obvious it became that I was perfectly capable of living independently. When Patricia called him yesterday morning with final instructions, he had made a decision. I recorded that phone conversation, he said, pulling out his cell phone. Would you like to hear what your daughter-in-law really thinks about you? He played the recording, and Patricia's voice filled the small diner booth. I heard her talking about me like I was already dead, discussing how quickly they could clear out my house and put it on the market. She talked about forging my signature on banking documents, about the importance of getting me committed before I had a chance to change my will or give any money to charity. The old bitch has been holding us back for too long, Patricia's voice said through the phone's tiny speaker. David's finally ready to put family first. His real family, not some senile old woman who's outlived her usefulness. Hearing those words in that voice, from the woman I had welcomed into my family and tried so hard to build a relationship with, was like being slapped across the face. But underneath the hurt, I felt something else growing. Anger. Pure righteous anger. What can we do? I asked Marcus. Well, he said, sliding a different cell phone across the table. I think it's time we called Emma and told her what her parents are really up to. And then I think we need to pay a visit to your house before David and Patricia finish packing up your life. As I dialed my granddaughter's number, I realized that Marcus had given me something I hadn't felt in months. Power. The power to fight back against people who had underestimated me because of my age, who had mistaken kindness for weakness. Emma answered on the second ring. Grandma Frances' dad said you were going to a special birthday dinner. How's it going? Emma, sweetheart, I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. I need to tell you something very important about your parents, and then I need your help. By the time I finished explaining the situation to Emma, my granddaughter was crying angry tears and asking how she could help. Marcus and I worked out a plan during the drive back down the mountain. Emma would go home from school as usual, but instead of confronting her parents immediately, she would gather evidence of their activities and document anything they had already removed from my house. Grandma, I found boxes in our garage last week, Emma said during our second phone call. Mom said they were donations, but now I'm wondering if they're your things. Take pictures of everything, I told her. But don't let them know you're suspicious. Marcus had contacts in the legal community who could help us move quickly. While we drove back toward town, he called a lawyer who specialized in elder abuse cases. By the time we reached the city limits, we had an appointment scheduled for first thing in the morning and a plan to document everything David and Patricia had done. Mrs. Francis, Marcus said as we turned onto my street, I want you to know that I'm going to make this right. What they hired me to do was wrong, and what they're trying to do to you is criminal. My house looked different as we approached it. The porch light was on, even though it was still afternoon, and I could see moving boxes stacked near the front door. David's black sedan was in the driveway next to Patricia's red SUV. They were inside going through my life like scavengers picking over a carcass. Are you ready for this? Marcus asked. I looked at my house, the house where Harold and I had built our life together, where David had taken his first steps and lost his first tooth and brought home his report cards. The house where I'd planned to live out my remaining years, surrounded by memories of happiness and love. I'm more than ready, I said. Marcus and I walked up the front steps together. I used my key to unlock the door and we stepped into chaos. Boxes everywhere. Furniture moved around, pictures taken down from the walls. Patricia was in the kitchen wrapping my good china in newspaper, while David carried a box of books toward the front door. They both froze when they saw me. Francis, Patricia said, her voice pitched artificially high with fake concern. What are you doing here? We were so worried when Marcus called and said there had been a change of plans. I looked at Marcus, who shook his head slightly. He hadn't called them. I bet you were worried, I said calmly, worried that your plan wasn't going to work. David set down the box of books and walked toward me, with his hands out like he was approaching a dangerous animal. Mom, you seem confused. Marcus was supposed to take you to the facility where you'll be safe and comfortable. You mean the psychiatric hospital where Patricia arranged to have me committed based on falsified medical records? The color drained from David's face. Patricia's mouth fell open, then snapped shut. For a moment, the only sound in the room was the ticking of the mantel clock that Harold had given me for our 20th anniversary. I don't know what lies this man has been telling you, Patricia said, recovering first. But you're obviously having some kind of episode. David, call Dr. Henderson and tell him we need emergency intervention. Don't touch that phone, Marcus said quietly, and something in his voice made David stop reaching for the cordless phone on the kitchen counter. I walked over to the box of books David had been carrying and looked inside. My collection of mystery novels, Harold's woodworking magazines, the photo albums I had spent years organizing. They were packing away my entire life. 47 years. I said more to myself than to them. 47 years. Harold and I spent in this house, and you two thought you could just erase it all in one afternoon. Mom, we're trying to help you, David said, but his voice lacked conviction now. Help me. I turned to face him directly. David, do you remember when you were 12 and you broke Mrs. Peterson's window with a baseball? Do you remember what I told you about taking responsibility for your actions? He nodded reluctantly. I told you that being a good person means admitting when you've done something wrong and trying to make it right. I told you that lying makes everything worse. I gestured around the room at the boxes and chaos. What do you think your father would say if he could see this? That hit home. David's face crumpled, and for a moment he looked like the little boy who used to crawl into my lap when he had nightmares. Patricia said you were getting dangerous, he whispered. She said you were going to hurt yourself or someone else. She said if we didn't act soon, we'd be responsible for whatever happened. And you believed her instead of trusting your own mother. Patricia stepped forward, sensing that David was weakening. Francis, you're twisting things around. You're confused and upset, which proves that you need professional help. The only thing I'm confused about, I said, is how I raised a son who would choose his wife's greed over his mother's well-being. That's when Emma walked through the front door. My granddaughter took in the scene, the boxes, the moved furniture, her parents' guilty faces, Marcus standing protectively near me. She was carrying a manila folder that I suspected contained the photographs she had taken of the items stored in their garage. Dad, Emma said, her voice shaking with disappointment. How could you do this to Grandma? The next few hours were a whirlwind of revelations, arguments, and legal maneuvering that would have made a good television drama if it weren't my real life falling apart and coming back together. Emma opened her folder and spread photographs across the dining room table. Pictures of my belongings stacked in David and Patricia's garage, including several pieces of furniture I hadn't even noticed were missing from my house. A jewelry box that had belonged to my mother, Harold's tools, the china cabinet that had been my grandmother's. I've been watching you take things for weeks, Emma told her parents. I thought maybe you were borrowing them or storing them for Grandma, but now I understand what was really happening. Patricia tried to maintain her facade of concern. Emma, sweetheart, you don't understand the complexities of adult decisions. Your grandmother needs professional care and we're trying to make sure she gets it. By stealing her stuff, Emma shot back. By lying to her and trying to have her locked up in a mental hospital? Marcus stepped forward and handed me a business card. Mrs. Francis, this is the lawyer I told you about. She's expecting your call first thing in the morning. In the meantime, I think we need to document everything that's been taken from your house. For the next 2 hours, we created a detailed inventory. Emma proved to be an excellent witness, able to remember exactly when she had seen various items being moved from my house to her parents' garage. Marcus took photographs and made notes, building a case that would protect me from any future attempts at manipulation. David sat quietly in his father's old recliner, watching the process with growing awareness of what he had almost done. Several times he started to speak, then stopped himself. Patricia, on the other hand, became increasingly agitated as the extent of her scheme was documented. This is ridiculous, she finally exploded. Frances is 75 years old. She has no business living alone in this big house. We were trying to protect her and protect ourselves from liability. Protect her. Emma stood up and faced her mother. Mom, you were trying to steal from her. You were going to have her locked up so you could take her house and her money. That house should be ours eventually anyway. Patricia snapped, dropping her pretense completely. Why should we wait until she dies and then have to pay estate taxes? Why should we watch her give money to charities when we're struggling to pay bills? The mask was completely off now. Patricia's true feelings about me, about family, about what she thought she was owed, poured out in an ugly torrent of resentment and entitlement. David stared at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. This isn't who I married, he said quietly. This is exactly who you married, Patricia retorted. You've been complaining about your mother for months, about how she's too independent, how she won't listen to advice, how she's sitting on all this money while we struggle. I'm the one who came up with a solution that involved fraud and having my mother committed to a mental hospital under false pretenses. A solution that would have worked if she hadn't gotten lucky and found an investigator with a conscience. Patricia shot back, glaring at Marcus. That's when I made my decision. David, I said, standing up and walking over to where my son sat, slumped in his father's chair. I want you to listen to me very carefully. You have a choice to make right now, and the choice you make will determine whether you have a mother for the rest of my life. He looked up at me with Harold's eyes, and I could see the boy I had raised struggling with the man he had become. You can choose to support your wife's attempts to steal from me and control my life, or you can choose to be the man your father and I tried to raise you to be. But you can't choose both. The room fell silent, except for the ticking of the mantel clock. Emma moved to stand beside me, slipping her hand into mine. Marcus remained by the door, giving the family space to work through our crisis, but ready to intervene if needed. Patricia looked back and forth between David and me, clearly calculating her next move. David, don't let her manipulate you. She's using guilt and emotional blackmail to control you, just like she always has. The way you used lies and fraud to control me, David asked his wife. That's when Patricia made her fatal mistake. Instead of backing down or apologizing, she doubled down on her attack. Fine, she said, grabbing her purse and car keys. Choose your mother over your wife. Choose the past over the future. But don't expect me to stick around and watch you throw away our financial security for the sake of an old woman who won't be around much longer anyway. With those words, Patricia walked out of my house, and as it turned out of David's life. David sat in silence for several minutes after we heard Patricia's car start and pull out of the driveway. Emma sat on the arm of his chair, and I could see her trying to decide whether to comfort her father or maintain her anger at what he had almost done. "Mom," David finally said, looking up at me. "I'm so sorry. I don't know how I let things get so twisted around in my head. Because you stopped trusting yourself and started trusting someone who didn't have your best interests at heart." I said gently, "It happens to good people, son. The question is what you do when you realize you've been led astray." Over the next several hours, we put my house back together. David and Emma carried all the boxes back inside, and we spent the evening returning my belongings to their proper places. Marcus stayed to help and to make sure Patricia didn't return with some new scheme. As we worked, David talked about the gradual way Patricia had poisoned his thoughts about me. How she had started with small complaints about my independence, then escalated to concerns about my safety, then finally convinced him that drastic action was necessary for everyone's protection. "She made everything sound so reasonable," he said, hanging one of my favorite paintings back in its place above the sofa. "She said we were being responsible adults, planning for inevitable problems before they became crises. That's how manipulation works," Marcus explained. "A little bit of truth mixed with a lot of lies presented by someone you trust." The legal proceedings that followed were swift and decisive. Patricia had left enough evidence of her fraud that my lawyer was able to secure restraining orders and press charges within a week. The forged medical documents, the falsified incident reports, and Marcus's recorded phone conversations provided more than enough proof of criminal intent. Patricia tried to claim that she had been acting in my best interests, but the recorded conversation where she called me a senile old bitch who had outlived her usefulness made it difficult for anyone to believe her motives were benign. The corrupt doctor who had agreed to sign falsified mental health evaluations lost his medical license. The psychiatric facility that had been willing to accept a patient based on fraudulent documentation faced investigation by the state health department. David filed for divorce within 2 weeks. Emma chose to live with me rather than move to the apartment, where Patricia had relocated after being served with divorce papers. My son attended counseling to work through the guilt and confusion of having been manipulated into betraying his own mother. Marcus became an unexpected friend. He refused to accept any payment from Patricia for the job he never completed, and he spent considerable time helping me understand how to protect myself from future exploitation. He taught me about financial safeguards, legal precautions, and warning signs of elder abuse. "Mrs. Francis," he said one evening as we sat on my front porch drinking lemonade and watching Emma practice soccer in the front yard, "I've been investigating people for more than 20 years, and I've never seen someone handle betrayal with as much grace as you have." I had a choice, I told him. I could let what David and Patricia almost did to me make me bitter and suspicious of everyone, or I could focus on the fact that good people like you and Emma were willing to help me when I needed it most. Emma flourished living with me. Her grades improved, she made new friends at school, and she seemed relieved to be away from the tension that had been building in her parents' house. David visited regularly, and slowly we rebuilt the trust that Patricia had nearly destroyed. The house that Patricia had wanted to sell so badly became a gathering place for neighbors and friends. I started hosting monthly potluck dinners, opened my spare bedroom to a foreign exchange student from the local community college, and volunteered more actively at the church and community center. 6 months after my traumatic 75th birthday, Emma and I were planning my 76th. David had suggested a quiet family dinner, but Emma had bigger ideas. Grandma, I think we should invite Marcus and his family, and Mrs. Henderson from next door, and maybe some of the people from the community center where you volunteer. That sounds like a lot of work, sweetheart. It sounds like a celebration, Emma corrected me. A celebration of everything good that came out of something that started so terribly. She was right. What began as the worst birthday of my life had ultimately led to a richer, fuller, more connected life than I had experienced in years. I had learned that I was stronger and more resilient than I had realized. I had discovered that there were people in the world willing to stand up for what was right, even when it cost them something. I had gained a deeper relationship with my granddaughter and eventually repaired my relationship with my son. Most importantly, I had learned that age is not a weakness to be ashamed of or a burden to be managed. It's a source of wisdom, experience, and perspective that the world needs. The people who tried to silence me and control me because of my age had failed to understand that 75 years of living had taught me lessons about resilience, justice, and the importance of fighting for what matters. Sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in the most unexpected packages, and sometimes the family you choose is stronger than the family you are born into. The family I chose included Marcus, who chose conscience over profit, and Emma, who chose truth over convenience, and even David, who chose to acknowledge his mistakes and work to make things right. As I look back on that terrible and wonderful birthday, I realize that Patricia's attempt to steal my independence actually gave me something more valuable. It gave me the knowledge that I can face betrayal and emerge stronger, that I can trust my own judgment, even when people I love are telling me I'm wrong, and that there are always good people willing to help if you're brave enough to accept their assistance. Growing older doesn't mean becoming helpless or irrelevant. It means becoming wise enough to recognize manipulation, strong enough to fight back against injustice, and generous enough to forgive people who lose their way. It means understanding that every day is a gift, but some days the gift comes in disguise. Have you ever had someone you trusted try to take advantage of you because of your age or situation? Have you ever had to choose between family loyalty and doing what's right? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Please like this video if my story resonated with you, and subscribe for more real-life stories about overcoming betrayal and finding strength in unexpected places. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they're stronger than they know. Thank you for listening to my story, and may you always have the courage to stand up for yourself and the wisdom to choose the right people to stand beside you.